Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Niger, military officers announced Wednesday they've overthrown President Mohamed Bazoum, imposing a curfew and shutting down borders in the West African nation. Colonel Major Amadou Adraman addressed Niger on national television late Wednesday, flanked by other members of the military.
All the institutions of the Seventh Republic are suspended. The Secretaries General of the ministries will take care of day-to-day business. The defense and security forces are managing the situation. All external partners are asked not to interfere.
The Nigerian president, Mohamed Bazoum, vowed on social media today to fight his ouster. Meanwhile, protesters took to the streets of the capital, Niamey.
We are here to defend democracy.
We are here to defend the Republic. We are here to show our commitment to the rule of law and to say no to any attempt to seize power by force or arms. Democracy must prevail. The ballot boxes have prevailed and President Bazoum has been elected for 5 years. The people are on their feet.
The U.S. immediately called for Bazoum's release as the UN and other powers condemned the apparent coup. Niger is a key ally for Europe and the U.S., which has 2 drone bases and some 800 troops in Niger, where it's been engaged in counterterrorism training since 2002. Violence by armed groups has since surged throughout the region, killing civilians and displacing millions of people. It's not clear if those behind the coup in Niger were trained by the U.S. military, which has trained officers behind recent coups in neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali and other West African nations. Earlier this year, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with President Bazoum and positioned the U.S. as a better security partner to Niger over the Russian mercenary group Wagner, which has expanded in the region in recent years. This all comes as Niger and the greater Sahel region is in the throes of a humanitarian disaster due to the ongoing conflict and effects of the climate crisis. In neighboring Mali, Human Rights Watch has released a new report detailing atrocities committed against civilians by the U.S.-backed Malian army and Wagner Group Russian mercenaries. The report describes extrajudicial executions, forced disappearances, rapes, and looting that have taken place since last December. Mali suffered ongoing insecurity and deadly attacks by armed groups which foreign powers have failed to stem. 2 back-to-back coups in 2020 and 2021 have further destabilized Mali. Earlier this year, Mali expelled thousands of French troops and UN peacekeepers. Afghanistan's Taliban government says it's closed down all women's beauty salons nationwide. The Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice had given salons 1 month to comply with an order to cease operations, shuttering some of the last remaining spaces where Afghan women and girls could congregate. This comes as the Biden administration says it's sending a diplomatic delegation to Qatar for a rare meeting with Taliban representatives. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel said the talks will focus on security, humanitarian aid, Afghanistan's economy, drug trafficking, and women's rights.
This is not intended to mean any kind of indication of recognition or any kind of indication of normalization or legitimacy of the Taliban.
Israeli forces fatally shot a 14-year-old Palestinian boy in the head during an overnight raid in the city of Kilkilia in the occupied West Bank. Witnesses said Israeli soldiers responded with live rounds after Palestinian youth threw rocks at them. Faris Abu Samra is at least the 37th Palestinian child killed by Israeli forces so far this year. Ghana's parliament has voted to outlaw capital punishment with a narrow exception for cases of high treason, making Ghana the 124th country in the world to abolish the death penalty. The West African nation hasn't carried out an execution since 1993, but the change in law will see death sentences for nearly 180 prisoners commuted to life in prison. In Chile, teachers walked off the job Wednesday for a 24-hour nationwide strike, demanding the government make good on promises to reimburse teachers for a historical debt incurred when the former dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet slashed their salaries and pensions. This is union leader Paulina Cartagena Vidal speaking from a march of teachers in Chile's capital, Santiago.
We are demanding, among other important things, the payment of the historical debt, an urgent demand that does not resist further delay. We are also demanding the prompt payment of the retirement incentive bonus, a bonus due to the low pensions of workers.
The U.S. Federal Reserve voted Wednesday to raise interest rates by another 0.25%, taking the cost of borrowing to its highest level in over 20 years. It's the 11th such rate increase in less than a year and a half. In a letter to Fed Chair Jerome Powell, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts called the Fed's moves needless rate increases that threaten the economy and noted the unemployment rate among black workers rose sharply last month to 6%. Warren added, quote, extensive research shows that black workers are usually among the first to lose their jobs when the labor market falters. Accordingly, sharp increases in black unemployment can be a strong predictor of an impending recession, she said. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell sparked concerns over his health Wednesday after he suddenly stopped speaking during a news conference and had to be led away by his Republican colleagues.
This week has been good bipartisan cooperation and a string of
The 81-year-old Republican leader had just begun speaking to reporters about the Senate's record-breaking $886 billion military budget when he froze and stared off into space. After a 20-second pause, Republican Conference Chair John Barrasso, who is a medical doctor, led McConnell away. McConnell returned to the podium a short time later, insisting he felt fine. Senator McConnell suffered several falls this year, including an incident in March that sidelined him from the Senate for 6 weeks with a concussion and broken ribs. A Trump-appointed federal judge in Delaware has suspended a plea deal between Hunter Biden and federal prosecutors. The president's son had agreed to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges as part of an agreement that would have allowed him to avoid prosecution on a separate gun charge. But on Wednesday, the U.S. District Judge Mary Ellen Noreika ruled the agreement lacked legal precedent and questioned the broad scope of the immunity deal, which Biden's lawyers say would have protected him against other charges. By the end of the day, Hunter Biden pleaded not guilty to 3 tax and gun charges. We'll have more on this story after headlines. Here in New York, former Columbia University OBGYN Robert Hadden was sentenced Tuesday to 20 years in a federal prison for sexually assaulting patients during examinations, over 20 years. U.S. District Judge Richard Berman handed down the maximum prison sentence allowed in the case, noting federal prosecutors believe Hadden abused at least 245 women. Lawyers representing survivors say Columbia had a long history of ignoring Hadden's behavior in order to protect its reputation instead of acting in the victim's interests. So far, Columbia University and New York Presbyterian Hospital have paid out $236 million to settle claims by over 200 former patients of Dr. Hadden. One of the survivors, Evelyn Yang, recently wrote, quote, "To this day, I'm still waiting for Columbia University to notify former patients that a now twice convicted sex offender worked at Columbia for 20-plus years. They've been saying that that's not their responsibility, but how does that make sense?" Yang wrote. Yang is the wife of the former presidential candidate, Andrew Yang. An Ohio police officer filmed unleashing a police dog on an unarmed black truck driver during a July 4th traffic stop has been fired. The Circleville Police Department said actions taken by Officer Ryan Speakman, quote, did not meet the standards and expectations we hold for our police officers, unquote. Video of the incident shows the 23-year-old truck driver, Jadarius Rose, had his hands in the air when Speakman directed the dog to attack him. Rose was hospitalized with significant bleeding on his arms, then booked on felony charges of failure to comply. We'll have more on the use of canine units by police and prison guards later in the broadcast. And Sinead OConnor, remembered as much for her haunting vocals as for her fearless and outspoken protests, has died at the age of 56. Sinead OConnor rose to stardom in 1990 when she released her version of the Prince song, "Nothing Compares to You." In 1992, she performed Bob Marley's War on Saturday Night Live, then proceeded to rip up a photo of Pope John Paul II on live TV, declaring, quote, "Fight the real enemy." The move, a protest against systemic child abuse in the Catholic Church, of which she was a survivor, provoked widespread uproar. She addressed her SNL performance days later during an interview with Entertainment Tonight.
Ireland has the highest instance in Europe of child abuse. I experienced it myself, and I found his presence in Ireland, telling the young people of Ireland that he loved them, hilarious. At least when I studied the history, I found out that the people who were responsible for telling lies in the first place were the Vatican, who, through permitting the invasion of countries and the destruction and murder of entire races of people in the name of God and for money, and then their subsequent overtaking of the educational systems of all the countries that they went into, led to distortion of historical fact.
A decade later, in 2002, an investigation by the Boston Globe shined a spotlight on sexual abuse and its cover-up in the church. Sinead OConnor was an ally of the LGBTQ communities and marched for abortion rights decades before it was legalized in Ireland. She converted to Islam and started using the name Shahada Sadakat in 2018. She spoke out for Palestinian rights, respecting the Palestinian civil society call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, once saying, quote, "On a human level, nobody with any sanity, including myself, would have anything but sympathy for the Palestinian plight. There's not a sane person on earth who in any way sanctions what the Israeli authorities are doing," she said. Sinead OConnor had 4 children. Her cause of death has not been revealed. Her son, Shane, took his own life a year and a half ago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.